show starts in 1 minute. Good evening, folks, and a hearty welcome to our drive-in theater. We have a wonderful evening's entertainment lined up for you, one that will provide several hours of pleasurable relaxation and diversion for you and your family.
Like 9 out of 10 film stars, Raquel Welch uses Lux Beauty Soap.
Well, no, I like to be a woman and a man to be a man, you know.
We hope you'll make this a weekly visit. You love the tasty array of snacks we have to offer. Bring your friends. There are always wonderful new pictures to see. We hope you have a wonderful time.
Welcome one and all back to a new year of the Longhouse, the show about art, culture, politics, philosophy, etc. for the sensible centrist. Ludwig Path, welcome back. How has Christmas treated you?
Yeah, it feels good to be back, but nice to get some relaxation and some time with the family. So yeah, now I'm back again now for 2023, ready to kick some ass and do some more Longhouses.
Yes, me too. I noticed that last week that I was this week I noticed that since we didn't do it last week, I was kind of itching to get back into it. And this week we're starting off with something that I really enjoyed. Real quick here, I see that we are also joined by Leo Borealis. Welcome.
Good evening, good evening.
Good evening. How was your Christmas?
My Christmas was very, very peaceful, more or less. No, I was back home with the family and stayed over New Year's, so it was very traditional. but good. How were yours?
Pretty much the same, except that most of my family live around the place where I already live anyway, so we didn't have to travel that far. But yes, family, good food, good times were had, pretty much. Not anything special, but I mean, that's the way I like it. So, actually, before we start, a couple of sort of items of housekeeping. Viewers, keen-eyed viewers might notice that this episode does not have any numbers on it. It is called The Longhouse Explores the Machiavellians, and something we want to try out for 2023 is to sort of categorize our episodes a bit better, so you can sort of watch out for that as we go on, and maybe we'll even be able to create specific playlists, etc., if there's anything specific you're looking for. But that is pretty much the only thing I wanted to say about that. You might notice some different titles, some different styles of videos, but ultimately it's in the interest of improving the quality of the shows, and a side effect of that might be that we will probably be streaming a bit shorter on average. Now, that being said, we probably will do our mega streams throughout the year at some point when the opportunity presents itself, but we're going to focus even harder on quality over quantity, as it were. Any more thoughts, like Pat, before we get going?
No, I think you summed it up well. So, I mean, like you said, there's been some feedback that it's kind of hard to grasp what the show is about, and I guess we never even thought as far as trying to package this into specific categories and so on. But we're 1 year in now, and we're more professional than last year. So, I mean, that comes with the territory. I think we're communicating more effectively both on the streams and off the streams in terms of what how exactly the streams are labeled and in what ways people can understand them and process them and so on.
hopefully it'll help out, and hopefully the end product is going to be better as a result. Anyway, today we are going to be exploring, as the title says, the first half of the book, The Machiavellians, The Defenders of Freedom, by one James Burnham. And this is a book that Ludwig and I read, I suppose, before Christmas, during Christmas, etc. And we pulled out some quotes, and we pulled out some concepts that we wish to share with you. I certainly found it very interesting, coming off of having read The Populist Delusion, among others, last year. But as I said to Ludwig Path before we started the stream, it feels like, and The Populist Delusion does reference the Machiavellians, if I remember correctly, at certain points. But it does certainly feel like it's a book that's sort of one level down and attacking sort of the same things from a different angle, which I really enjoyed.
Yeah, I mean, we are a little bit late to the party here because I got into a lot of this DR content in early 2021 after the US election and so on, and you watch YouTubers like, say, Aaron McIntyre or the Distributist. I know Academic Agent talked about this as well. So then James Burnham was very hot at that time, and they were talking about the Machiavellian politics, and they were talking about the managerial revolution that we might get back to later and so on. So like for the big influencers, they've already made their kind of hot take videos on this with summary points and so on. But the difference in this video, I think, is that we're going to have to go a little bit more into the chapters and look deeply at some of the concept more than you can do in maybe like a 10-minute summary video, and also try to connect that in terms of what are the points that have been used in the now sensible centrist sphere from the Machiavellians, and for us now having read it, how we feel the actual product stacks up to the sort of more accepted dogma, quote unquote, inside of the sphere.
Me, I found the book in all to be very good as a sort of lens, like a new lens in my toolbox, a different way of looking at politics, not necessarily from the idea of, it's only power politics, the sort of Machiavellianism, but sort of as a tool to understand the mechanisms a bit better, I guess, and to understand the theory behind it, the science, as he calls it when he talks about Machiavelli. Leo, do you have any thoughts here? I think you're muted.
I'm sorry. I forgot I put the mute on. Well, I concur on your points. I mean, it's a good handbook, and as you say, AA has essentially, with its populist delusion, done the light version of what James Burnham had already done. I mean, it's quite a hefty script. Not that long, but it can be, I guess, for the uninitiated, a bit daunting of a text. I mean,
especially once he quotes, just from a technical perspective, when he quotes the older authors, and I can speak from experience, having tried in my youth to read The Prince, I bounced off of it quite hard, just because the language is first of all translated from Italian and then written in quite difficult English, right?
Yeah, I mean, it was. I mean, you have to also remember that it was written over 400 years ago. So the way that it comes with a different mindset also coming through from the author. So Machiavelli doesn't really approach perhaps writing in the same way that a modern author would. And also, you have to realize that Machiavelli also doesn't really write to a general audience. He is writing for his erstwhile lord, so to speak.
Yeah.
In a way. So
we'll get into that in chapter 1 and 2 of this book, and and it's a very good. I think I wasn't really sure where he was going in chapter 1 or in part 1. I suppose when I started it, but by the end of the first part, I really enjoyed the way he sort of eased you into the mode of thinking, right? Falling outside the normal moral constraints for $2 says, "Welcome back, boys. You were missed." And I noticed friend of the channel Jay Burden here saying boycotting the show till he kicked Leo. Have you angered the Americans this week, Leo?
Not more than usual that I know, but who knows?
Who knows? I think first of all, we'll do sort of the really fast Wikipedia highlight of who James Burnham is. He was I should say, mid-century philosopher who, I think he was the chair of the University Department of Philosophy in New York. And his writing career was, don't quote me on this, but I think it was in the 1930s through the 1940s, with this specific book being published in the mid-40s during the war, 43, 44, something like that. But most importantly, he started out as a Marxist, a Trotskyist, actually, which is actually not that uncommon, I think. I seem to remember that this isn't the only only time I've seen someone start out as a Trotskyist, end up on the right, but with that very hardcore understanding of power politics and the realism side of things. What do you guys think?
Yes, I agree. I mean, you see with Burnham, like it's a very like sort of hardcore both understanding of power relations and hardcore materialism that permeates his writings. Almost to the point where it's kind of strange that he seems to have been accepted, as the Wikipedia article says, as the leader of the American conservative movement. But what you usually understand for being under American conservatism is very closely tied with idealism, Christianity, metaphysics, Protestantism, and so on. But I mean, with Burnham, there's none of this like whatsoever. He
spends
sort of
pretty much the first part of this book just slamming that, right?
He slams that stuff, and he's also, I mean, in some senses, even when you read the Machiavellians, and this is something that's not been very well emphasized by someone like Oren McIntyre or the Academic Agent, is that he comes off as a bit of a progressive, to be honest. Like reading
yes,
some of his books, he's very much about.
I was going to get into it, but yes,
trying to move toward the future, and not being a reactionary in a sense. He seems to
he's very anti that.
Scoff at reactionary sentiments and people who are afraid to sort of try to move into the future and move towards sort of the power and the dynamism and so on.
Yeah, he's very much he's pro progress to put it in a way, in the sense that he's more than willing to use the tools ahead of him to defeat his enemies. I think that's the approach he seems to be taking, and I think if you're going to give him one criticism, is that he would accept those tools almost uncritically without thinking about what damage they could do to society as a whole.
Yeah, you really see that in the first chapter, where he looks into Dante's De Monarchia, where he was really tearing into to Dante's we will say religious idealism as a motivator for him writing the book. He doesn't like it at all.
We can actually just, unless we have anything more to say about him as a person, we can probably just jump straight into it. What do you guys think?
Yeah, we probably could do that. I mean, it's not unusual also for for people at this point who I think someone like Nordanon said in the chat there that Burnham and Mongnum was former Trotskyist. I mean, Peter Hitchens also were a sort of a Trotskyite as well. So you can see this as a recurring pattern within the academia of the 19th century, more or less.
Yeah. Now, I've just written a couple of bullet points here. This isn't everything that's in the first part, but it's something that I feel is worth discussing or just highlighting as the point of this part of the book. But you had some, we've also collected a couple of quotes, and you had a couple of quotes here at the beginning. I think this is from the very first couple of pages in Letting Path. Do you want me to highlight those?
Yeah, I mean, first, maybe we should do a little quick primer on Dante as well. I mean, this is Dante Alighieri, like the Dante Alighieri, mostly known for the Divine Comedy, and unfortunately, that's the only thing that he is known for. Which, of course, fair enough, because it was like a huge, epic, sprawling series that broke ground and created sort of literary revolutions in both in religion and literature and so on. Of course, I mean, if you Google him, it's just everything is just about the Divine Comedy and very little else. But in this chapter, I mean, you get a lot of esoteric insights into the character of Dante Alighieri and his actual motivations, his real life, and so on. Which, I mean, it's something that you do see with when I've touched on scholarly works looking into Dante, is that they do try to diminish him quite a bit and make him look like a bit more of a petty, sort of pathetic figure who sort of kind of used the Divine Comedy as more almost like a sort of fanfic or as an outlet to kind of let out his aggression on people that he was unhappy with, and it didn't go along with his political goals and so on. But like, just having said that, you could read the opening quote, because I think it's a nice ease into the sort of the core point of this chapter.
I'll bring that up on the screen. Now, he starts off with basically listing the Democratic Party platform of 1932. It seems that has sort of spurred him on to write this entire thing, it seems. Or it's just a very good example. So I'm just going to do my best to read through this, and then we'll get to sort of why he starts off listing all of this. The Democratic Party solemnly promises, by appropriate action, to put into effect the principles, policies, and reforms herein advocated, and to eradicate the policies, methods, and practices herein condemned. We advocate 1. An immediate and drastic reduction of governmental expenditures by abolishing the useless commissions and offices, consolidating departments and bureaus, and eliminating extravagance to accomplish a saving of not less than 25% in the cost of the federal government. Number 2. Maintenance of the national credit by federal budget annually balanced on the basis of accurate executive estimates within revenues. A sound currency to be preserved at all hazards. We condemn, etc., the open and covert resistance of administrative officials to every effort made by congressional committees to control the extravagant expenditures of the government. 5. The extravagance of the Farm Board, its disastrous action which has made the government a speculator in farming products. And then it goes on to further say, to accomplish these purposes and to recover economic liberty, we pledged the nominees of the convention, etc. That the nominees upheld the pledge was made clear by the candidate for presidency on July 2nd, 1932, when he spoke in public acceptance of the nomination. As a quote, as an immediate program of action, we must abolish useless offices. We must eliminate actual pre-functions of government. Functions, in fact, that are not definitely essential to the continuance of government. We must merge, we must consolidate subdivisions of government, and like the private citizen, give up luxuries which we can no longer afford. I propose to you, my friends, and through you, that government of all kinds, big and small, be made solvent, and that the example be set by the President of the United States and his cabinet. He returned to these themes frequently throughout the campaign. In radio address delivered on July 30, 1932, he summed up, any government, like any family, can for a year spend a little more than it earns. But you and I know that a continuation of that habit means the poorhouse. What are we to make of the words in these several quotations? They would be easy enough to explain if we could assume that the men who wrote them were just liars, deliberately trying to deceive the people. There is, however, no convincing evidence that would permit us to draw a cynical conclusion. Are we to believe, then, that they were utterly stupid, with no understanding of economics or politics, or what was going on in the world? Taking the words as they stand, this would seem to be the only alternative conclusion, but this also does not seem very plausible. These men and their associates, though they doubtlessly knew less than everything, and less than they thought they knew, were surely not so ignorant as to have believed literally what the words seemed to indicate. There is some further puzzle here. Perhaps the words do not really have anything to do with cheap government and sound currency and balanced budgets and the rest of what appears to be their subject matter. We are asking questions about the meaning of the words men use in connection with political and social affairs. In order to avoid bias from partisan feelings of the moment and to seek a greater generality in the answer, I shall briefly examine these same questions as they arise over words written more than 6 centuries ago. Okay. So it's a bit of a rambly introduction, but the idea here is basically, hey, none of this makes sense because that's not actually what the Democrats are doing.
Yes, I mean, for those of you who followed any political history, that there's pretty much no matter if it's Democrat or Republican, they pretty much never reduced the budget at any point. They never stopped borrowing money. They never stopped expanding the bureaucracy and so on. So it's I mean, reading this, you could look at sort of how you think about, you go into the past and think about, oh, they're so based, they're so based in the past. Look at the Democrats, the real Democrats, the real Republicans who wanted to cut spending and so on. But James Burnham just seems to reject this on its face and explains that even, back in the 1930s, they were talking about like responsible government as a household and so on. But the point is that this is for the rubes. This is in a sense, a certain formulation of their ideas that is coated in language that's sort of obscuring the actual realpolitik beneath. Right.
It is what he terms the formal versus the real meanings, as I've noted here in the
exactly. I mean, this is essentially. I mean, we're getting deeper into this with Dante as well. But when you look at the video, like the academic agent video against ideology, this is sort of what comes in here, like what you're reading in this statement by the Democratic Party. That is essentially their ideology in a sense, and the ideology doesn't necessarily have anything to do with the operations of like the power apparatus of the Democratic Party, but they will have a kind of spokesperson version of what they're doing that they can.
You have the myth, but then in the day-to-day operations, you cast that aside as needed.
Yeah, I mean, exactly. I was on Jay Burden's show to talk about like the hyper-realism of the modern world, but I mean, in a sense, there is something like hyper-real about the sort of division here between ideology and realpolitik that seems to have persisted like before the advent of computers and simulations and so on. So even in the past, you had like this sort of seemingly this divide between like the ideology and the mythology and like the actual thing that needed to be accomplished politically.
Yeah. And so this is how he starts off the book, basically saying, hey, this doesn't map to what they do in the real world. Why is that? And then he starts talking about Dante for some reason. And he calls this politics as wish because he accuses Dante of making, I think, as he would say, the mistake that a lot of men make when they set out to do political work is that they start with the ideology. They start with the wish, as it's titled here, that they would like to fulfill, the utopia. And then they try to map reality onto that utopia afterwards, instead of working with reality first and then trying to, use that to achieve something better.
I think if Burnham was a zoomer and he wrote this in the current year, he would call it politics as cope, because I think that sort of, in a sense, translates into what he is trying to say here. But yeah, I mean, he sort of gets into the Monarchia, that is a book written by Dante that I don't know how you would describe it. It's a sort of political manifesto or something to that kind in terms of like what he wants to do politically. And the reason that he brings this up is that this is a sort of book just to explain exactly what is sort of formulated in this book. For context, like in the time that Dante lived, there was essentially, he as I understand, he lived in Italy, right? And there was a sort of conflict between the Holy Roman Empire and the sort of what becomes like the Catholic papacy, and he was very much like a Holy Roman Empire fan, fighting the Virgin papacy appreciators. And the whole book is a sort of argument for why the world needs to be united under one empire. In a sense, he was like a sort of proto-globalist
Pretty much.
Looking through these eyes, like you said, we need to have order in the world. Like his ultimate goals is like harmony in the world, peace, everlasting peace, and the ability of salvation of every man. If I understood the description correctly, and what he sees as a prerequisite to have this everlasting peace and harmony and salvation is to have one centralized empire that can rule over all men, because that is harmonious. That empire has to be the Roman Empire, and in a sense that it has to be sort of the religious ruler has to let's just say be supreme to the what you call it, the earthly ruler, and that's sort of he tries
the Pope should be above the emperor, basically.
Exactly, and he tries to make these arguments like the standard. He goes from your first principles. These are the things that I believe in, and then he tries to argue using scripture that because of the references to the Roman Empire in the Bible as like this more qualified empire, that means that it should still be the Roman Empire. And Burnham, of course, comments that this is a sort of mistake, where he seems to conflate the Holy Roman Empire for the actual Roman Empire, which sort of parts of fell and then it consolidated in other places to the Holy Roman Empire, and Burnham claims that these are not the same things, which seems to have been...
I remember there being quite a bit of arguments about whether or not it is the same thing or not. So I think it's just one of those things where depending on who you ask, you're going to get different answers.
Yes, but I mean, from Dante, the answer is pretty clear that it's the same thing, and because obviously, he sees the Holy Roman Empire as a continuation of the original Roman Empire that is being mentioned in the Bible multiple times, that means that they should continue to rule. I mean, there's like these other arguments where he says that in a sense, for the sacrifice of Jesus Christ to be valid, that means that Pontius Pilate had to have the authority to judge all of mankind if Jesus is to forgive all of mankind, in a sense, which is then implicitly, it means that God has granted Pontius Pilate the right to judge mankind, meaning that from those principles that the Holy Roman Empire is now actually the correct rulers and so on. But we're getting into then James Burnham starts getting into like the actual life of Dante Alighieri and the sort of political struggles that he was in, claiming that, I mean, first of all, Burnham rejects metaphysics. That's sort of the first thing he says, that this is sort of it's unspecific when you start talking about things like salvation and eternal peace and harmony and stuff like that. It can sort of mean anything, and it's a point that I agree with. I ended up having some argument with someone on Twitter who asked me if I believed in liberty or I believed in freedom and so on, and it really comes down to that it's not really a very concrete term. It sort of means whatever the people who rule wants it to mean, and it's just a typical spokesperson speak.
Yeah, and it's interesting because when I started reading the book, I wasn't really sure where the tagline "Defenders of Freedom" would come into play, but it certainly does when you get to part 2, and he talks about Machiavelli and his goals.
But of course, I think that this is of course somewhat contentious, which was what I was talking about on the previous slide, because I know that you have a lot of people in these spheres that are Catholics or are, say, Orthodox fundamentalist Christians and so on, who do believe in first principles and believe that you can derive the truth through first principles. I mean, I don't mean this as a jab or anything, but I know, say, Aaron McIntyre is a Catholic, so it's sort of a surprise for me to see him kind of jump on this book that sort of repudiates a lot of the Catholic integralism that you see.
Yeah, I think it might be a case of Burnham being right on a lot of things, that people are willing to overlook the reasons why he do them. If you see what I'm saying.
I see the need for like the practicalities in politics, but it just seemed to me like this part exactly seemed to stick out as a bit of a loose thread, it seems, in a lot of the discourse, and people who have to look through their fingers and ignore some parts and embrace others to make this work and so on. But summarized, the Monarchia, it's basically cope. It's full of metaphysical gibberish that has nothing to do with the real world. It doesn't translate in terms of logical goal setting. It doesn't translate in terms of scientific inquiry. In a sense, it doesn't translate into any practical application, other than just kind of being a sort of puff piece or sort of larger propaganda piece written by Dante to justify his political leanings.
I mean, I have a quote here from this page where he talks about sort of the things these political writings contain. And I think that the fourth point, if you will let me quote from here, illustrates how he feels about the monarchia and similar texts, also the Democratic Party platform. And he says, the formal meaning serves as an indirect expression of the real meaning, that is, of the concrete meaning of the political treatise taken in its real context, in its relation to the actualities of the social and historical situation in which it functions. But at the same time that it expresses, it also disguises the real meaning. We think we are debating universal peace, salvation, a unified world government, and the relations between church and state, when what is really at issue is whether the Florentine Republic is to be run by its own citizens or submitted to the exploitation of a reactionary foreign monarch. We think, with the delegates at the Council of Nicaea, that the discussion is concerned with the definition of God's essence, when the real problem is whether the Mediterranean world is to be politically centralized under Rome or divided. We believe we are disputing the merits of a balanced budget and a sound currency, when the real conflict is deciding what group shall regulate the distribution of the currency. We imagine we are arguing over moral and legal status of the principle of the freedom of the seas, when the real question is who is to control the seas. And I like this part because I feel like it really summarizes Burnham's mode of thinking here, pretty much for the rest of the book.
Yeah, the first chapter also has this kind of interesting subtext that you see. You can see Burnham's what do you call it, objectivist materialism rearing its head, because he's very, when he speaks about the eventual Ghibelline victory over the political control of Florence, for example, and the rise of the mercantile class and so on in quite well.
He almost celebrates it, I feel.
Yeah, he's doing a little the variances as well, you know, of punching his fist in the air almost when they come to that part, and it runs like a little thread.
Yeah,
yes, he does describe Dante Alighieri and his political faction and some sort of in Florence as being a reactionary faction, basically trying to almost prevent the progress of and the sort of emergence of the more kind of mercantile class, the mercantile society coming into Italy. But I mean, the whole point is that, yeah, basically Dante was unsuccessful in his political ambitions, and you know, all of this is obscured in a sense both by the Monarchia and by the Divine Comedy, as sort of like, you know, what is the real thing behind that? It's just this kind of embittered, exiled political actor, in a sense, who was not successful in his mission, who has just spent his entire life writing about the people he doesn't like, and so on. And of course, there's nothing wrong with this. There's nothing wrong with his writing, but it's used to sort of illustrate the example of kind of politics as being wish, in a sense, where it's just pure metaphysics and ideology and wishy-washy talk that doesn't have any concrete content and is completely removed from and obscures the underlying realities of what's actually going on. And that's how he sort of needs to make this distinction to kind of make you understand what it means to be a Machiavellian, in a sense, as opposed to an ideologue.
Yeah, he has a quite good turn of phrase that he ends the chapter on, if I can quote. Political analysis becomes, like other dreams, the expressions of human wish or the admission of practical failure.
Yes. There's also a part towards the end here, which I also enjoyed. I put in the revealed preference of power. Now, revealed preference is an economical term, mostly used by a lot of the Austrians who tend to disregard any stated preference, as it's called, from the Homo economicus, and only look at what is actually measurable. What do people actually buy, not what do people say that they want to buy. And he has a quote here which I sort of think captures the revealed preference of power in his worldview, at least. I'll just read that. The chief historical effects of the French Revolution were to break up the system of the older French monarchy. with its privileged financiers and courtiers, to remove a number of feudal restrictions on capitalist methods of production, and to put the French capitalist into a position of greater social power. It might well have been argued prior to the Revolution that these goals promised to contribute to the welfare of the French people and perhaps of mankind. Evidence for and against this expectation might have been assembled. However, this was not the procedure generally followed by the ideologists of the Revolution. They based their treatises not upon an examination of the facts, but upon supposedly fundamental and really quite mythical notions of a primitive state of nature, the natural goodness of man, the social contract, and similar nonsense. They sloganized as the aims of the Revolution liberty, equality, and fraternity, and the utopian kingdom of the goddess of reason. Naturally, the workers and peasants were disappointed by the outcome after so much blood. But oddly enough, most of France seemed to feel not many years later that the aims of the revolution were well enough realized in the military dictatorship of Bonaparte. I think that pretty much sums it up. I can't really think about
Yes.
any other. Like, yeah, it's like they can talk about utopia all they want, but when the strong man shows up, people tend to fall in line. So that's the way Burnham is going to think about things. Do we have any more we want to say about part 1, or should we keep going?
I think we covered this very well. We could start looking into Machiavelli himself and sort of the discipline of Machiavellianism.
Yes, so the entire second part is pretty much devoted to Machiavelli as a political theorist, and also a bunch of his writings, because it seems that is the basis he uses to form every other idea in the book going on.
Yes, so I mean, as a popular, as a meme in popular culture, the term Machiavellian is something that is being floated around, but it's not necessarily directly related to the man himself. But as a sort of, it is a sort of maybe a pejorative, I would say. It's used in psychology as a sort of, really as a kind of diagnosis, in a sense. If you've heard about the dark triad of personality traits, so it's been updated now because I've been following Dr. Jordan Peterson on Twitter. It's apparently like the dark tetrad now. That's the sort of 4 personality traits: so psychopathy, Machiavellianism, narcissism, and sadism. That's the most recent addition to this set of traits. And like you're going to hear Jordan B. Peterson talk about the sort of the dark tetrad, dark triad personalities, and so on. And Machiavellianism here, it means basically someone who is willing to manipulate others with no regard for their well-being, in a sense. It means like using people as a means and not in an end in themselves, and having little regard for the morality around this type of manipulation, which of course is, in a sense, it does map onto the Machiavellian science of power in one sense, but I think Burnham has some other arguments in terms of like why that's actually a good thing.
Yeah, and as I've noted here, he writes, he hints towards the freedom through realism. As I said, the tagline is "Defenders of Freedom," and you think about the meme, as you said, of Machiavellianism is very often linked to tyrannical behavior, but Burnham quite deftly, I think, shifts your vision on that. And I have a quote about that as well. It's quite long. I'm not sure if we want to talk about anything else before I start reading that.
So what's the quote about exactly? I don't know if there's something that fits in.
It's how it's almost a page, so it's hard for me to sum it up, but it's basically that how Machiavelli doesn't throw away the ethics. He tries to merge politics and ethics.
Well, yeah, I think I had some of the similar reads, but I mean, for context, then Machiavelli was a political advisor, right, who lived, like say, some couple of 100 years later than Dante Alighieri, very much at the beginning of the Enlightenment period. And like Burnham talks about Machiavelli's political, goals in the book, where, like, from the Machiavellian perspective, how it differs from from Dante's perspective. That's like this wishful perspective. Machiavelli was a nationalist, and before you go like pumping your fist and whoa based, I mean, he was a nationalist as a contrast to a feudalist, which is in a sense the system that they sort of had, where you had the feudal states with feudal lords and certain independent cities. And Machiavelli's wish was to sort of modernize Italy by making it one unified nation under a single prince, in a sense to not be left behind by the future. So, I mean, nationalism at this point in history is very much a progressive Enlightenment project, which is something that is, I mean, something you'll hear from a lefty typically if you bring this up as a sort of, reactionary point. But that is how it's presented in the book. That Machiavelli had a concrete goal of modernization of Italy through basically creating one unified nation under one prince, so to the point where you could have a centralized government, and through that system have a greater dynamism moving forward into the future. That sort of avoided a lot of the problems with the feudal systems that he claims was basically just they only existed for warfare. In a sense, there was no room for anything else.
Yeah. And he talks a lot about, as I wrote here, the quote unquote science of Machiavelli's political theory, the methods he used to reach those conclusions.
Yeah, I mean, Burnham basically
goes very much against Dante's way of writing and exploring.
Yeah, so the contrast then is really between like the empiricism and idealism, where for Machiavelli it's facts first. It's always basically facts has to decide the narrative, and for Dante it's really more about the first principles. That the logic comes first, and then everything has to fall in line with that. So I mean, with the way with the development of science, Burnham basically says that Machiavellianism is really just scientific principles applied to politics, which has to be understood in contrast to how politics were thought of, mostly up until that point, which was mostly influenced by Aristotle, where politics and sort of the pursuit of virtue and the good life were very much intertwined in a sense. So there was like this very tightly knit idea of the virtue, as you can see with Dante Alighieri, and the political animal in a sense that has to participate in political life as a way to sort of actualize himself. But with Dante, that just sort of falls away, and he's more interested in the goals themselves and sort of using political processes, using power to achieve political goals, and taking kind of the values out of the analysis. In a sense, you could have, so you in a sense you sort of separate the values that you have and the means that you use to get to those values.
Yeah. He spends, I think, an entire chapter talking about the processes and methods that Machiavelli used. And he also attributes to Machiavelli the invention of political man. I think he likens it to, as I said, Homo economicus from the economic man from Adam Smith, to sort of create this mode of operation that isn't necessarily a one-on-one mapping to a real human being, but it can explain sort of and model or I guess simulate, you could say, the political actions of people in societies. But I can read the quote here about how Burnham tries to sort of flip the view on Machiavelli. Let's see here. Almost all commentators on Machiavelli say that his principal innovation and the essence of his method was to, quote, divorce politics from ethics. Thereby he broke sharply with the Aristotelian tradition which had dominated medieval political thought. His method, they grant, freed politics to become more scientific and objective in its study of human behavior, but it was most dangerous because through it politics was released from control, unquote, by ethical conceptions of what is right and good. We have already seen enough to realize that this opinion is confused. Machiavelli divorced politics from ethics only in the same sense that every science must divorce itself from ethics. Scientific descriptions and theories must be based upon the facts, the evidence, not upon the supposed demands of some ethical system. If this is what is meant by the statement that Machiavelli divorced politics from ethics, if the statement sums up his refusal to pervert and distort political science by doctoring its results in order to bring him into line with moral principles, his own or any others, then the charge is certainly true. This very refusal, however, this allegiance to objective truth, is in itself a moral ideal. Moreover, in another sense, Machiavelli undertook his studies of politics for the sake of very definite goals, one of which I have analyzed in this section. These goals, like all goals have an ethical content. Indeed, ethics is simply the consideration of human behavior from the point of view of goals, standards, norms, and ideals. Machiavelli divorced politics from a certain kind of ethics, namely from a transcendental, otherworldly, and it may be added, very rotten ethics. But he did so in order to bring politics and ethics more closely in line, and to locate both of them firmly in the real world of space, and time, and history, which is the only world about which we can know anything. End quote, I suppose.
So I
And
mean,
I think
yeah,
I understand what he's trying to say, but I think he's, as I said, he's willing to adopt tools that can do, like Burnham here in the sense, is willing to adopt tools that can do equally as much harm to him as it can to his enemies, right?
Yeah, well, that's the basic, of the crypto Trotskyite. They never really considered that the tools and weapons they put into place into a political system will ever be used against them, because of course they will always be the one wielding them. So prudence isn't really their thing.
But I do
no, and I think
understand what he's getting at with the, we're very early in the book, but the idea that seeing the world as it is and acting in it as the world is more in service of the people than trying to tell them how the world should be.
yes, but I mean, yeah, he seems very unwilling to entertain any type of criticism of Machiavellian politics at all in this book, which I think there are good criticisms of this system, but he just sort of scoffs them away as being either antiquated or rooted in like brainless metaphysics and so on. I mean, I think one of the biggest problems of this modus of thinking, if you truly adopt it in its whole, is that you essentially just become a slave to power, in a sense. Say someone like Henry Kissinger, for example, you just the only thing you can think about is basically how to attain more power, but and you end up just sacrificing any type of goals that you have to just sort of hold on to more and more power, and you have to just keep conceding more and more ground until, like, you have to ask yourself, what was the reason I got into politics for the first to begin with? And you could end up getting a lot of power through Machiavellian means, but at the end you never actually accomplish any of the goals that you wanted to in the first place. So it can be a bit of a tricky thing to balance out, in a sense. I mean, there's also the idea of the kind of value-free analysis that is somewhat questionable. It's very difficult, I think, to make an analysis that is completely value-free and that is completely scientific without any cluttering from certain personal biases that you have.
Yeah, we talked about that during the Harare stream. I mean, the basic. I think that when you say it's a value-free analysis, I think if you're going to be, a bit hardline on the issue, I think it's bullshit. There is no such thing. I mean, you can try to, you can preface it. This is my best attempt at a value-free analysis, but then also kind of put it in there that it's always going to. I mean, it's always going to be colored, because you can't analyze everything in any given situation. So you are going to cherry pick, and you are going to, in some ways, also unconsciously exclude things that you perhaps, it would be a better argument, and it's more clear if it doesn't take up these kind of points. But these are also points.
In that sense,
like that.
And I think this book is best, or Burnham is at his best when he's writing pro something, not when he's trying to defend it, right?
Very much so.
Because he usually just sort of dismisses any criticism and says that's stupid and gay, and then moves on to talk about what he actually wants to talk about, which is fine. But I would prefer it to be more honest about it.
When he does his little Tanzum-spiel about progressive market forces and stuff like that, it's almost like he is doing don't you know it's current year.
Pretty much, yeah. So it's something that is very useful. It's a useful read. I think I'm very happy that I have read it, but I don't think that Burnham is sitting on any answers here. I think he's just clarifying and bringing ahead ideas that have laid dormant in Europe for quite a while, at the point where he's writing about them, obviously. So, just so everyone knows what this book really is. It's not like a solution to everything. It's more a revival of the Machiavellian mode of thought, and a critique of how abstract the current system has become. Even
Yeah.
Hello, even
Hello.
back then, yes.
The little bit of roboting, yeah, but I think the book is very good at sort of bringing people out of the dream world in a sense, especially if you want to go from just being one of the ruled to being a ruler, quote unquote. If you actually want to do politics, you need to disillusion yourself of a lot of the spokesperson talk and a lot of the idealism that exists, and try to actually embrace the sort of conception of political power that is somewhat consistent with reality. Even though you can have ideals, there's so many things that you're sort of being served within the kind of the mainstream narrative in terms of how politics works, that is just not helping in terms of accomplishing goals at all. It will just keep you spinning your wheels forever, in a sense.
Yeah.
There's also in certain of the functionality of Machiavelli's, should we say, advices to the prince. In this case, Lorenzo de' Medici, which is the one that he's referencing to, which started off this whole book. One of them is it's a more of a long, winding thing, but the short, cute version is essentially that a concrete will to power creates a minimum of victims. Because if you know what you want and you go for it mercilessly, you will essentially create less bodies than if you faff around and try to do a halfway thing. Either you go for it or you don't. If you try to do a little bit and then leave other certain parts untouched, it's like it's the worst thing that you can do, because then you leave the parts of your political enemies to run around. You leave parts of the power structure intact, and then they will just come and start trouble again. It's like the swamp thing that Trump did. He said he would do it. Threaten his political enemies. He started inching towards doing something about it, and then didn't do anything. So he riled everyone who was against him, riled them up, and then just lay down with his belly in the air and just go, "What? Me? I didn't do nothing."
Yeah, and I think that's like one of the lessons from Machiavelli that I think most people have completely missed in modern politics. That you have to either, you're going to use carrot or stick, basically. And Machiavelli says you have to use either carrot or stick. You cannot use both carrot or stick and the stick at the same time. And if you're going to use the stick, you're going to have to use a lot of stick until there's basically nothing left of the of the enemy, right? And I mean, so what does this translate to? Well, see the example of Trump. Mean tweets are funny, right? Talking shit is funny. Dunking on people is funny. Does this translate into political power? Not at all. Not whatsoever. Nope. There's, you could try doing this in any setting where there's like a, local communal governance board, local school board, like if you live in the, municipality or like a co-op or something, and try to go to these political meetings and dunk on people and throw jokes and talk shit.
Yeah,
and so
or
on.
just like look at the comment section of like your local, town's Facebook pages and political stuff, right? There's always going to be a couple of guys who's like in every comment section shouting up a storm about, and they might very well be right about everything that's wrong and what the politicians needs to do. But I mean, are they anywhere close to power? No, obviously not.
Yes,
right?
And are they getting closer to power by doing this?
No,
like by putting the memes in the comment sections and like one more meme and then we're going to have power. It does not work like that. Either you have to try to negotiate and flatter your way through, or you just have to find some way to politically just annihilate your opponent. And I mean that in the vaguest sense. That could mean a lot of things. But you have to, in a sense, shut them down to the point where they can't attack back if you're going to take that road. And it seems to be missed because there's so much aggression, but there's no decisive aggression. In a sense, it's all just kind of like blurting out how dissatisfied they are and complaining, which is, I mean, it's besides not being politically ineffective, I think it's quite immature, honestly.
Certainly, yeah. It's always boomers as well, if you notice, who do this usually. All right. What else? Did we cover everything here in the part 2 now?
Yeah, I think we
I
covered most of the
more
points.
I want to say about this. Yeah, let's do part 3, in which we get into the ruling class and Gaetano Mosca, which he pulls quite heavily from in this this part. Most importantly, he defines these 4, or like these 2 axes that exist in the society that I'm labeled here in the bottom. But first of all, he spends some time describing how there is always a ruling class. No matter the structure, the ideals of a society, you will always have a minority controlling a majority. And I'm getting into other authors thinking about this, but in Mosca's view, this is a constant, and I'm not sure if anyone here disagrees. I don't think there's anyone on this panel that disagrees that that's a feature of society.
No, I mean, a lot of these simpler truisms from the elite theory comes from this guy. Like, who says organization says oligarchy, and basically the organized minority always beats the disorganized majority. This is something that Mosca has. I think he's sort of a sociologist and a political theorist, and he's been inside of so many organizations just studying how they actually operate. And
I think I just double-checked, but I think that was Michel's, not Mosca.
Yeah, maybe that was
I think Michel's was a student of Mosca.
That's me mixing up then.
Yeah.
But it is. I think Mosca was the one who came up with the concept of the ruler and the rules, isn't he?
Yeah, though it is a bit derived from Machiavelli's Foxes and Lions. Is that it?
Yes.
But yes, it's a furtherance of that into sort of a bit more of a class structure, where society, as you said, always has the rulers and it always has the rules, and that's how it works. I don't know what more to say about that. I think we just have to take that as a given.
Yes.
Sorry.
I mean, there's a lot of interesting parts that he goes through in this book. They're trying to describe how the ruling classes operate. I mean, the first thing is that in the Machiavellian tradition, the ruling class are not going to be moral fags in a sense. They will have to be very cunning, practical, have high levels of ambitions, and willing to operate within, a bit of a gray area of power in a sense. So that's one characteristics they always have to have. The other characteristics is that if you're going to have a ruling class of people, that class of people will have to have, it's going to be very beneficial for them to have some type of skill that is in demand or very relevant to the society that they live in. So I think the example he gives is that, say you have an agricultural society where the most important thing for society to survive is agriculture. Then if you have a group of people who are very good at agriculture, they are in a good position to be the rulers in a sense.
Yeah. We have I have a quote here which I think is sort of sums this up from the end of, I think it's chapter 2 in this part. I can just pull that up. We should further note that in stating the theory of the ruling class, Mosca is not making a moral judgment. He is not arguing that it is good or bad that mankind should be divided into rulers and ruled. I recently read in a review by a well-known journalist that this country will never accept a theory of the elite, as if it is wicked to talk about such things and noble to denounce them. The scientific problem, however, is whether this country or any other will accept such theories, but whether the theories are true. Mosca believes that the stratification of society into rulers and ruled is universal and permanent, general form of political life. As such, it would be absurd to call it good or bad. It is simply the way things are. So, I mean, if you're going to go further into any thinking based on Mosca, you're just going to have to accept this.
But
more or less. I mean, he also takes up a little interesting thing. I think in this this idea of the ruling class, that the misconception that the great commons has, that that you have this idea that the tyranny on that one person can do it all themselves. In the popular mind, you point at one guy. It's Hitler, it's Putin, it's all that. But the reality is that they always are surrounded by a vanguard that aren't really seen. And he also does some in that strength. Mosca also talks about the other error, which is comes from the democratic theory, that the masses, the majority, can rule themselves, which is preposterous.
Sorry, what was that? Cut out for me.
Oh, is it something with my link, perhaps?
No, I think it's on my side. Sorry.
Okay. No. I mean, it's the you have like the two classical errors. The one that people think that the masses can, of course, take care of themselves. They can rule themselves. That's the democratic delusion. And then they still think that but the dictator is always the one guy. He's always that's bad. He does the entire thing, but he needs a vanguard surrounding him, and the same vanguard is also, while perhaps more invisible within the democratic system, also exists there. It just has some different cosmetics on it.
Yeah, and as Ludwig said, that the makeup and the classes that you find in this vanguard. I used the upper middle class here. Maybe that is wrong, but I just needed something to latch it onto. Can have a different makeup depending on the society. If it's an agricultural system, it's going to be people who are good at agriculture. If it's a very pious society, then the priests and the religious figures are going to have a higher status and be composed. Sort of the vanguard is going to be composed of those people. So there's no sort of one way to create this vanguard. It just forms automatically, or naturally, you should say.
But yeah, like Leo and you mentioned that this sort of the democratic illusion, a lot of these sort of normie level memes of either the dictator or the self-ruling mass, it seems to be like in varying degrees a taboo, like with the journalists, that we will never accept the theory of the elite and so on. I think if you live in Scandinavia, if you live in Scandinavia, then I think that's pretty common. If you try to talk to common people about elites, political elites who rule the country and so on, they're not very accepting of that idea. I think maybe in other countries to a lesser degree. Like when we talked to Burkarl on the stream, there seemed to be a slightly more acceptance, maybe in Finland, if I'm not mistaken, of the idea.
Well,
of
it's
like
one of those
someone...
strange things that people hear. I think it's just our culture, because the people hear the word elite and they think about something very different than what we're talking about when we're talking about the political elite in this sense. Because every time I sit down and talk to someone about this, and I say that these people who are our politicians form the elite of society, people understand what I'm saying. But if I just say like these people are the elite and they make plans that either involves or doesn't involve you, but you have no say about it, people will be like, oh, you're a conspiracy theorist. No, they're literally having dinners together. You see it on the news, right? So it's a weird sort of mode of thinking that has been ingrained in us.
Yeah, what was the quote again? The poor people conspire, rich people just make plans.
Right. Actually, our very first episode, Ludwig, on the Longhouse, featured an image from of our Prime Minister and the leader of NATO, Stoltenberg, because they were in the news at the time for having had social dinners wherein they talked about his possibility of becoming the leader of the central bank here in Norway. This was before the war in Ukraine, which obviously meant that he had to stay on in NATO. But there was a big thing about these people sort of having talks with other elites of society, the leader of the oil fund, for example, and other stuff. And they had to cover and be like, no, we didn't talk politics at our dinners. It's like, Jesus.
Yeah.
At this point, I would just prefer you to tell me that, yeah, we did, and we're making plans and we're taking care of you guys. I mean, that would be a better sell than trying to tell the people that no, we're not making plans.
We don't call it that. It's not called conspiracy. It's called lunch.
Exactly.
It is the same thing, but you know,
yeah.
It's the polite way of saying it.
So
Exactly.
I mean, yeah, I mean, it's a strange thing. It does seem to be like, you know, the further you get away from this kind of more first world progressive societies, the less of a stigma there seems to be attached to talking about the actual ruling elite, because I think it is more explicitly visible. In poorer countries, is less of the hyperrealism, less of the ideology to sort of paint over it.
I actually think that it's just more internalized here. I think that's the difference. It's just so abstracted, right? I mean, remember what AA says, that power needs to show itself, or it needs to flex itself. It wants to be seen, but it's just shown in a way where we internalize it, and you know, as not explicit sort of explicit shows of power. It's more just generally accepted. I think the one he always likes pulling up is the leader of the ADL telling what's her name? Was it
Whoopi Goldberg?
Whoopi Goldberg, that she's an anti-Semite for, you know, daring to pose question marks on the Holocaust on national television, which is quite an extreme action, quote unquote, from the punishment angle. But I mean, to us, it's just everyday politics and everyday TV, right?
Yeah,
It's like a public execution, except, you know, no blood.
Yeah. Well, essentially, it's you know, it's a bigger power complex trying to rein in a different competing complex.
Yeah.
Because you have the within, at least you could say, call American power politics, you have two you have like this dual dynamic of the Holocaust and slavery, and they are kind of trying to compete for the space. You know, there can be only one. Has the, you know, the founding narrative myth, and the African American complex, of course, try to shove theirs, and the West Coast elite try to hold the post Nuremberg regime, to uphold it, and that is what we saw with that kind of thing. Essentially, he has a bigger stick, and he's using it.
He does, yeah. Yeah. Herlock Sholm says we were just basket weaving. I think that's a reference to the politicians. Very good. He also outlays here the autocratic versus liberal and the aristocratic versus democratic axes, which can be a bit confusing. So I have the book in front of me here to see if I can pull up any of the quotes here. But I might have to search for a moment to find it. Do you guys have any thoughts about these theories?
Well, one thing I have been thinking about this, and certain things that it almost become implicit within accepting these theories, is really the progressives basically in society as kind of like the natural ruling class of the post World War II Western world, which is something that, at least for me, seems more apparent after having read these books. That regardless, I mean, you look at countries, say, like Australia or Canada, or even the United States now, like the majority of that country is not progressive shitlibs consistently. Like, you have people with a very varied range of beliefs and so on, but it seems very consistently that the ruling classes will be far to the left, way to the left of center, and having like deeply progressive views. And I do speculate that like the sort of advantage that they kind of offer in the system is that they're, there's sort of techno-optimism and there's sort of technophilia that they have. It gives them an advantage, and sort of the cosmopolitanism and the kind of leveraging of the global network, in a sense, is also one of these kind of untapped power resources that they can just tap all over and over again to stay in power. And the rest of us are just kind of opposing that, trying to just pull back on their strengths. But they, currently with the way the dynamic is set up, they just maintain power.
Yeah. And you can see that in Canada right now, because you have what happened here a couple of this last 6 months is the de facto revolt of the Western elite base in Western Canada against the Eastern base, against Ottawa, and these are like based in the resource. They have their power base in the resource extraction industry, more or less, and so you can see there in the little minicosm how one elite overstepped essentially, and then another local elite used the power structure that they had to essentially just pull the rug out of the Trudeau government, more or less, and say that you can do that, but if you do that, we're gonna fucking split the country.
Yeah.
And we can do.
It's a big stick. Yeah, or a carrot. I don't know which one.
That's the difference between you have the techno-globalists have within their sphere a very large stick, but it translates poorly to power on the ground. I mean, real in flesh space, so to speak.
Well, I mean, that's why they need the lower class foot soldiers, right? I mean, that's the thing that I was thinking about, something that got me thinking from this chapter when he talks about sort of like the appearance of populism, right? But it's never about populism. It's about, there's something about like they come out and they point to the material enjoyments of the rich and powerful. They denounce the vices and wrongdoings, etc., etc. But I mean, you look at the people who do that, they're never really leftists, right? The only populists that really pop up seem to be right wing, right? The leftists are just there to like attack the acceptable targets and steal from the acceptable victims, which is currently is probably white people, right?
Yeah, that is why you see when all of these
they dress themselves as populists,
but
they
all
never
these,
really are.
If you will, Fox regimes always need to find a new group of or a group of kulaks. Because once the old kulaks have moved away or in somehow insulated themselves
I guess
against
the weird conclusion is that there is no leftist populism. There's just right wing populism. Or is that too strange?
No, from a certain point, it's a correct observation. But
I mean,
it's also
using this same lens. I mean, right?
Yeah. That should be that, because I guess you have some leftist populism, but not in the Anglosphere, because in the Anglosphere the positions are entrenched, and any leftist populist who actually tried to sneak a morsel of power would just get instantly demolished by the machine.
Yeah.
Instantly.
Well, that's an interesting thought for me to carry forward. I will have to do the Machiavelli method and look at history and see if there's any support for that.
But take a look at that idea. Like if you take Tony Blair, the Blairite politics idea is to attack from the right.
Mm-hmm.
You don't. What happened last time with an Anglosphere politician that tried to attack from the left?
Yeah, that doesn't work.
No, the machine. I mean, it's not a permissible tactic by the workings of either American or British politics. I mean, Corbyn tried to do the left thing. Didn't work. Now did it?
First of all, he didn't win over any people, and second of all, he just got outed, right?
Yeah. And the thing is that you should also look at. I think the entire Corbyn, the slow process of getting rid of Corbyn was a really good demonstration, because they always attacked him, but they went hardest against his core supporters. They didn't go for him until the end, when he was alone and had no one to shore him up. Then they came for him.
Yeah, that's actually a very good example, I think, of this in action. Interesting. I'll bookmark that that theory, and maybe we'll return to it. Maybe there's a rule hidden in there, that there is no left-wing populism. Okay, any more thoughts on the autocratic versus liberal? Do you want me to maybe find the definitions here?
Yeah, you could probably read the quote.
I don't have the direct quote, but I have the page here in front of me. So let's see here. The autocratic principle and blah blah blah. I should have dug this up. I had some issues with my camera on my phone, so the point here anyway is literally that autocracy is the more stable, traditionalist, bureaucratic form of power, whilst the liberal is the freeing force of power. You could say that it permits free and full development of social activities. He says no autocracy has ever stimulated so intense a cultural and intellectual life as have developed under some of the shorter-lived liberal systems, as those of Greece and Western Europe. I'm not quite sure about that. Would you like to comment on that? I feel like that's a bit of his progressivism shining through. That the liberal, I think he places too much stock in the liberal part of it. That it frees up more than
he is a sort of liberal. I mean, it's probably, I don't know if it's the part of the book you're referring to, but the last subchapter of chapter 3, where he talks about what is the ideal political system. He does basically describe a sort of like Republican constitutional liberal system.
He does. It's very strange.
That's the
how he ends
that's
up
the
there.
Best that's the best you're gonna get, basically. That sort of says, if it's like a competently run republic, that's the best you're gonna get. It's not good. There's no utopias, there's no perfect solutions, but you could find like that kind of slightly, quote unquote classically liberal system, that is the best form of government. But no, I mean, I don't have a very thorough knowledge of history that I can sit and bring up examples of autocracies that produced like highly creative, cultural societies and so on. Maybe Leo Borales have some input.
Maybe someone in chat.
I do think he has a good quote also on this a little bit. It's let's see, where was it? Oh, there it is. It is the habit of utopians, of those who, like Dante, interpret politics as wish, not of scientists, to confuse their desires with what is going to happen. Yes. I think that is really, I mean, it's that whole thing that, oh, I want this to happen, this is going to happen, then doesn't happen, and they just go, what? But we were, we voted so hard. If we just do the thing harder next time.
Trust the plan on Twitter.
Yeah, I need. You should. If we just had memed harder, then we would have won.
I mean, I suppose that is why so many people had a quote unquote falling out with Trump, or had an awakening that was more realism and Machiavellian, to use a word again, after the 2020 election, especially when it looked like Trump came very close to doing a winning in Minecraft. The last one is the aristocratic and the democratic, and he has he says, the term democratic seems more suitable for the tendency which aims to replenish the ruling class with elements deriving from the lower classes. which is always at work openly or latently with greater and lesser intensity in all political organisms. Aristocratic we could call the opposite tendency, which also is constant and varies in intensity, and which aims to stabilize social control and political power in the descendants of the class that happens to hold possession of it at the given historical moment. Now, this is a quote from Mosca, not from Burnham. And he uses these things, as you said, Ludwig, to create this strange, I guess, picture of what an ideal state could look like, even though he's explicitly against creating ideal states. He bogs himself and almost drags Mosca with him into this weird over focus on judiciary and how to, on a technical level, ensure stability in a system. And I don't know if it's how Burnham thinks, or if it's just a product of not having any ideals that you get overburdened with sort of the specifics of how this is going to work.
Well, I guess this answers the question of like how James Burnham fits into the National Review crowd, in a sense,
right?
Where he's not like a first principles Protestant liberty Christian. He basically has just concluded that, based on all this research into realist politics, the best we can do is like a republic, constitutional republic. That's the best we can do, and that's my conclusion. So I abandoned the Trotskyite ambitions, and we're just going to try to maintain this for as long as we can.
What is strange is that, you would think that him being a realist would place more stock in, the how did we get here part. If his idea of the perfect thing is a stable republic with personal freedoms maxed, at least in economic terms, I mean, that has been achieved by systems that were more autocratic than it seems that he's willing to make, right?
Yeah, well, you can take the Trotskyite can take the Trotsky out of himself, but yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
fair enough. Yeah.
Say, I mean, he can.
I'm just getting.
He's still going to maintain a certain level of of his personality and how he views things. He can never really free himself from that kind of thinking.
I'm just recalling our interview with Ubersoy and his video where he lays out in great detail how things are supposed to work, but fails to account for how do you get a society to the point where you can implement this.
Yeah, and he also, when he goes into all of this, we're going to solve it with effectively legalism. We're going to make a lot of laws. Then we come back full circle back to that idea that he somehow misses out on the idea of a circulation of elites. He always says, we're going to stay in power, so this is a perfect tool. But he doesn't really. He seemed to brush away the idea that, well, if a competing power complex comes into power, then they're just gonna abolish all your laws, and then you're fucked.
And in that sense, a book like The Populist Delusion, although purely negative in its description, it's only a description of reality. It doesn't contain any visions for the future at all, but because it compiles a lot of the circulation of elites and other stuff into it, I think does a better job of describing sort of the state of 2020, although obviously Burnham was writing this at a different time. It's just a thought that occurred to me right now.
Yes, it's very easy to sort of superimpose the world we live in onto the world that James Burnham was writing in, and ask, why didn't you foresee that it was going to end up like this and so on. I mean, he might have had a completely different prescription if he.
Well, it's strange because I think that he starts his book by saying that if we continue down this path, it's going to go to shit, and instead of and then having talked about the things you've talked about, it's weird that that is his conclusion. Although, for the viewers at home, we're only halfway through the book here. There is more to come in the next episode. But if I recall, it doesn't change any of his, general conclusions about how society should function.
No, he's kind of loose on that one. But then again, I mean, as you pointed out, he does write this pre-Nuremberg, so
Fair.
The worst hasn't happened yet.
Might have had more faith when he was writing it.
Mm.
Let's be generous in that sense. Okay. I think I've gotten to talk about pretty much everything I wanted to talk about. Is there any questions in chat? Anything else regarding this that we want to cover? No, not at all. I see one Nathan CJ Hood saying "Evening, gentlemen" in the chat. Good evening. He claims to be. Let's see. Hang on a moment. Let me see if I can pick out. Nordanon says that Burnham was a National Review co-founder. So that's your answer, Luddick. I'm not sure if that's true. I have to take
maybe
it
got more paused over time.
Maybe.
I could imagine that. Yeah.
Well, Mooseford said I voted. Very good.
That is very good. Only you can vote to save democracy.
Exactly.
Our democracy.
Our politicians like to present themselves like they're just regular Joes. I imagine some boomer watching some politician eating waffles or something on TV and thinking he's literally me. Yes, that's a very Norwegian way of operating.
Well, I don't think so.
And if I just like angry post on Facebook a bit more, they're going to listen to me. That's another one.
I think there was a lot of emphasis, I mean, it's changed now, like with the Obama regime and so on, but, pre-Obama, to selling people like George Bush and Bill Clinton, Reagan and so on with the "he's just like me" thing. Look, I'm drinking beer in the pub and, I'm hanging out, fishing and so on. Like that seemed to be, they were targeting that kind of average Joe a lot more. Now it's much more the kind of these sort of progressive client groups that are being hardly targeted, and that's part of the reason you get so much of the pause.
I'm not sure if it's like a Blair effect or something, because I seem to recall this wasn't as much the case before him, but I might also be a bit too young to say that for sure. But he certainly had quite an adverse effect on Norwegian politics, that's for sure. Now, I remember someone asking a while ago, and I'm sorry I didn't get to your comment, but someone asked if we have a Discord. Here it is. And we don't, but we have something that is similar, which is the Matrix channel. It is linked in the description down below. If you follow that link, you can create an account, and it's basically like Discord, but it's encrypted, so no one can snoop on the dank memes that we post.
For the information, we don't have a formal rule, but we don't allow thug posting, for the guy who asked about that when I posted it on my channel.
What is that?
Don't ask. We just don't allow it.
Yeah. Nathan CJ Hood says Joe Biden is just like me. He's also under the control of the regime.
Yeah, it's funny because it's true.
There was a bit of a spat. Well, that's probably taking it out of proportion. I tweeted in relation to it because I was waiting in a queue for something, I don't remember what, where so the Rat Puppet on Twitter, OG Roland Rat, and a friend of the channel, Vercarl, were arguing about whether or not you should haul your own fridge. And to me, I think it's a very nice way of thinking of the elite theory mindset, is to say that, as my tweet said, on any given topic and on any given problem, 80% of people, borrowing from the elite theorists here, Pareto, 80% of people will always take the path of least resistance. And I mean, I'm including myself in that. I mean, it's a human heuristic. You're met with a problem. If there's a ready-made solution, you're going to do that, right? If you can pay your way out of it and it's not too much of a problem, you're going to do that. And that is what creates the rulers and the ruled, pretty much. Just extrapolating that, right? So that was a side note. I don't know if you guys have any comments or thoughts.
Fridge theory, is that the
Fridge theory? No, it's basically just Pareto, but applied to should you haul your own fridge.
Well, then again, the wholesome puppet rat is also, you know, a soft-handed academic, and well,
that's fair, but I mean,
he can't haul a fridge; he will break something, probably his back.
Well, but I mean, that's going to be 80% of people then, right?
Yeah, sure. I mean,
80% of people wouldn't haul their fridge.
I think I responded in that thread. If you've seen what's that movie with Arnold Schwarzenegger and Danny DeVito? I mean, like that's the difference between Beer Carl and the rat, basically physically. So,
well, yeah, but then the 80-20 physically is applied in that sense to both of those, right? So Burkhall is the 20 and he is the 80 in that specific circumstance, right? Now, if they were to give an academic dissertation, then Mr. Rat would be in the 20 and Burkhall would maybe be in the 80, right?
Yes.
So,
but yeah, maybe we'll get
just because on this one thing, you, Mr. Autist in the channel, know very much about Roman history and I don't. That doesn't mean that, you know, you get to rule society and I don't, or vice versa. You know, it's just a fact of life. And arguing about the stuff online is pretty much just a waste of energy. As much fun as it is to poke fun at people for not, you know, being able to just lift a fridge or get a mate, right? I actually hold a fridge with my father-in-law a couple of weeks ago.
You see,
wasn't too much of an issue.
Yeah. You see, you hold your own fridge. It's the mark of the neo aristocracy of Scandinavia.
Well, when it comes to fridges, I will proudly be in the 20%. Hauling fridges.
It's all going to the principle also. You know, if you want something done properly, you have to do it yourself, or at least oversee it done yourself.
Yes, maybe that's the next step for the basket weavers. We have to do a fridge hauling service or something like that. It reminds me of that. That's an ancient meme of like a posting of I think it's like the two guys moving company, and it says something like, "When you hire us, you don't just get the strength of our bodies, but the metaphysical strength of our bond of friendship as well," or something like that. No, not hauling bridges, fridges. I'm sorry, I was eating my words a bit, Lumberg. Okay, I think the stream is winding down. If we're going to follow our own 2023 goals, it should be high time that we end the stream here. And we'll probably see you all next week. Thank you for joining us. Thank you, Luddick and Leo. Do you have anything you would like to shill before we leave?
Yeah, no. Twitter and YouTube. Yeah, subscribe and follow, please.
Yeah, same name, Luddick Path on Twitter and on YouTube.
Yes.
Leo?
No, I have nothing of worth to shill, so I'm not much of a
Okay, thank you all for joining.
I think Evelyn is having a stream now as well. I saw something. I should send them there.
Check my YouTube. Is that on Scrump's channel?
Yeah, I think they are doing the duo thing today.
Oh, it's the new builds. Oh, it's those horrible British.
Yeah, so
you all go grope Evelyn and Scrump and tell them that the Walrus sent you. You do that, and we'll see you next week for the depopulation bond, which a viewer was kind enough to send me, and I found that topic quite interesting, actually. So until then, have a good time.